Hey everyone, it's Alex from KTZ Systems. In today's video, I'm going to be comparing my old workhorse Prusa Mark III to the brand new Upstart X1 Carbon from Bambu Labs. This is not a sponsored review. Neither of these companies sent me either of these products to review. I paid for them with my own money. I don't have any relationship with either of these companies, so I leave it up to you as to whether you can trust me or not. But in today's video, we're going to be talking about the differences between the two machines, open source licensing, of course, it's a very important topic for me, and just also some of the user experience differences between the two printers. So let's dig into it. Now what's interesting is when you look at a Prusa printer, everything on it is 3D printed. Obviously, you've got the aluminium frame rails at the bottom here. And then, you've got a steel bed and, there are things that were game changing. A removable print surface when the Mark III came out was not a mainstream feature. Before this, when I lived in London, I had one of the Creality CR10 machines, and that thing, I had to go to IKEA and buy a glass bed and put it on top of the glass bed and then spend hours manually tweaking each corner of the print surface just in order to get a level print and get anything to stick to that bed. Honestly, it was kind of a nightmare. And when I moved to America, I sold the CR10 in London and bought myself a Prusa because I'd heard so many good things about it. Now, the CR10 was a £300-ish printer, if I recall. This was a $700 printer, and it had to live up to the hype in order for me not to feel like I'd wasted my money. Little things, like I say, like a removable bed. Things like the Pinder probe in here that allow the bed to automatically level itself based on the, fact that the beds aren't perfectly level.
You want to experience true level? Yes? Wow, it's so...
Heated beds by this point were pretty commonplace. But, there are some other things in here as well, like having a direct drive extruder directly above the print surface, which means that you can do things like TPU, a flexible filament, which has actually got a bit of a tricky reputation just because it's so, if you have what's called a Bowden tube, which means that the motor that sucks the filament in is over here. And then there's a tube that connects this motor into the extruder here in the hot end that then squirts the melted filament out underneath. So direct drive is the way to go. And now, of course, that is exactly what Bambu Labs have done with the X1 Carbon. This, instead of being a bed slinger, is what's called a Core XY printer, which means that the print bed moves up and down instead of the Z-axis on the actual printer moving up and down like it does on the Prusa and a lot of the other sort of rep-wrap style printers like this one. And when you look at these printers, each of these little things here is all factory parts and they're all 3D printed. And that creates some issues with Prusa being able to just keep up with demand. We've seen videos online of their print farm, hundreds and hundreds of 3D printers making parts for other 3D printers. That's the whole rep-wrap philosophy, kind of taken to the nth degree, like the ultimate conclusion of the rep-wrap philosophy. One of the things I really love about Prusa is that their hardware is open source, their firmware is open source, and they've contributed so much to the community and advanced the hobby so far above and beyond where it was when they first got involved in the thing. And for the longest time, my default recommendation whenever anybody asked me which printer should I buy was a Prusa. There was just no question that you couldn't do better than this. However, as of about 4 or 5 weeks ago, like I say, I bought a Bambu Lab X1 Carbon. I was kind of sucked in by the speed claims. I didn't believe that they could actually stand up to any mustard. And I've kind of sold my soul to the devil with this one. So fully open source, open hardware, schematics even, everything is totally open source with Prusa. But with the Bambu system, the parts aren't 3D printed. We've got injection molded plastics in a lot of the fixtures and fittings in here. We've got things that have been machined out of aluminium. We've got beautiful enclosures out of the box, which is something you'd have to add yourself with a Prusa. Now, the price tag, this machine, like I say, is about $750 US. This one I think was about $1,400 or $1,500. But that comes with a multi-material system that can do up to 4 different colors all at once. It comes with a built-in enclosure, it comes with a webcam, and it comes pre-assembled out of the box. This is another major difference between these two printers. The Prusa, you can buy them pre-assembled, so perhaps I'm not comparing apples to apples here, but I love building 3D printers. Actually, during the pandemic, Prusa was so backed up being able to supply the market with these things that the lead times here in America of ordering these printers from Prague in the Czech Republic, where Prusa's based, was several weeks, if not months. And so what I started doing was ordering a printer every 2 or 3 months, building it and then selling it locally, just to give myself something to do. And it was actually a really good time. So I've probably built now about half a dozen of these printers from kit form. The first one took me 30 or 40 hours or so. By the time I'd done my 5th or my 6th, I probably got it down to about 15, maybe 10 or 15 hours, something like that. You just learn a few tricks about how to get things like captive nuts installed in different sections of the printer and all that kind of stuff. And also I've consumed about half my body weight in gummy bears doing that. But the thing about Bambu Labs is that this machine arrives as you see it, pretty much. It's got 5 or 6 screws holding the heat bed onto the bottom of the chassis. You pull the AMS out of the top because the glass on here just lifts off, and then you lift the entire thing here, fits inside the build volume of the printer itself. And in under 30 minutes from taking it out of the cardboard box, you're printing. At least, I thought I was. This was my first attempt at a print with the Bambu Labs printer. And I'll be honest, this was user error. Now this printer comes with a smooth plate. This one's called the cool plate, and it's designed for things like PLA. And then on the other side is the engineering plate for things like PETG, ABS, TPU, and a bunch of other polycarbonate materials, more exotics. I printed one thing on this because I'm kind of allergic to glue stick. I just hate it. It makes a real mess. I never have to worry about it with the textured plates. And so I ordered Bambu Labs make a textured plate for this printer. And so I put that in, and I tried to print the pre-sliced benchy, which comes on the SD card for this printer. And I had a bad time, as you can see. It was Spaghetti City. So I jumped into the Bambu Labs slicer, Bambu Studio they call it, sliced the model for the correct build plate, and boom, 27 minutes. I was able to print a benchy. Now, just to check myself, I printed another benchy before recording this video on the Prusa. I think this might be the last print this printer ever does, funnily enough. First and last, for me anyway. And this took 45 minutes. You know, not doing anything special, using the 0.3 layer height draft settings, all that kind of stuff. It's just a slow printer. And if there's one thing I genuinely find frustrating about 3D printing, it's the speed, FDM printing at least. So when I say FDM printing, I mean you put filament in the top, it squirts out plastic in layers on top of one another. There are other types like resin that work in a different way, but what I'm talking about today is FDM printing. And so just being able to take a machine out of the box and within 30 minutes be printing, it's actually kind of amazing coming from my experience with the Prusa machines. If Bambu Labs offered a kit version for a couple of $100 less, I think I would give it a go. But when you take the back plate off this thing and have a look inside, everything is super tightly packaged, and it's clear that it's not designed with the same level of user serviceability and just philosophy that these Prusa machines are designed with. Everything's open, everything's accessible in here, whereas this is a bit more like dealing with a MacBook or something like that. You know, this is the framework laptop, this is a MacBook Pro. And the experience, when I say it out loud like that, between those two different comparisons, isn't actually a million miles away. So now, to do a fair comparison on the price side of things, we need to look at the Prusa as it comes, with no multi-material system, which is an extra $300, no enclosure, which is another couple of $100 if you buy it from Prusa themselves, and then you need to add a webcam, let's say that's $50, and then you need to add a Raspberry Pi. I say need to, I want to, because Octoprint is awesome, and I actually have mine installed on the background here, which I don't know if you can quite see, but there's a little 3D printed case for a Raspberry Pi here, running Octoprint that just hooks via USB directly into the printer, and I can control it over the network. And that's amazing because there's no cloud involved or anything like that. It's all 100% local. very quickly, we're looking at price parity between these two machines. And the biggest difference really is the philosophy of the two companies. Fully open source versus somewhat, in some areas, open source, but mostly a proprietary Chinese company making this thing. Now, as a long-term open source advocate, I've worked for Red Hat previously. I've started multiple open source projects in my spare time. I find supporting such a company like Bambu Labs a similar situation to supporting a company like Apple. I know it's not the right thing to forward the goals of some of my personal beliefs and things like that, but it's really hard to beat the user experience that this machine offers with a full color touchscreen, printing a Benchy in under half an hour versus, 25 minutes versus 45 minutes on the Prusa. It just means I'm able to do things and use 3D printing in a lot more applications than I have before. You can see behind me, just up here, that the wall behind me, I use 3D printing all throughout my house. My tool wall behind me, these light fixtures above my head, for example, they're 3D printed too. I've been doing a bunch of stuff to organize all of the drawers in my house using Gridfinity. I've been printing things like brackets to put my desk together for years and years. And without a shadow of a doubt, the single biggest limiting factor that I've found in 3D printing is speed. And so if I can just get 2 to 2.5 times the speed just by switching companies, that's a really compelling situation I find myself in. And Joseph Prusa himself wrote a blog post on the state of 3D printing and open source. And I kind of feel for him because, Prusa as a company has built their empire on top of open source contributions, but they've given so much back to the community. Bambu Labs, their slicer is a fork of Prusa slicer. I wish I could be more confident in saying that Bambu Labs gave back as much to the community as Prusa does. And for me, they don't. But what they do is they further the mission of 3D printing for so many more people. And for the first time, I feel pretty comfortable recommending people buying a Bambu Lab printer if they're not a 3D printing nerd already. A lot of time in my past has been spent printing upgrades. I mean, just this light bar on top here, for example, I added this with a 3D printed part. The Creality CR10 and the Ender 3, all of these machines, the hobby, for the most part, is printing parts for those printers. Whereas with the Bambu Lab, I haven't done a single, well, I say I haven't. I printed a little mod here which raised the glass on top of the printer by a little bit so I could fit a brighter LED strip into the top of it. And that's it. Everything else is exactly as it came from the factory 4 or 5 weeks ago. And like I say, 500 hours later, I don't find myself thinking, oh, I wish it had this, or maybe I should add that, or where is that feature? In fact, I liked it so much that when Black Friday came around, I went ahead and purchased one of the P1S printers, which is basically the same as the Carbon, but it lacks some of the more exotic materials. Like, instead of an aluminium enclosure, it's plastic. It doesn't have the LiDAR sensor in there. The camera rate is frame rate is a lot slower. Just a bunch of stuff about the P1S is not top tier like it is on the X1. But that's okay because it's $500, $600, $700 cheaper than the X1 Carbon. So I'm fine with a couple of compromises. And in fact, the single worst thing about the P1S is it doesn't have this beautiful touchscreen on the front. But open source to the rescue, using an ESP32 based project, you can actually add a touchscreen to the cheaper P1S. Now, in terms of usability, it really is a point and shoot. There is not much you have to know to be successful to print with the Bambu system these days. In fact, I've got to the point where with my Prusa, I pretty much walked away and didn't look at the first layer, but I almost always did look at the first layer just to double check. But the Bambu has a LiDAR sensor built into the hot end so that when it does the first layer, it then parks the print head at the back of the print chamber and then scans the print surface using LiDAR just to check that there are no massive print defects or anything like that. And apart from this single failure, I've had probably 2 failures in 500 hours. And both of those, I would say, well, this one certainly was my fault for having the wrong settings set in the slicer. Then the others were just things like the bed had gotten dirty from my grubby fingerprints touching it and things like that. So As soon as I cleaned the bed using washing up liquid or dish soap, cleaned the print bed, put it back in, those problems went away. So really, apart from user error, this thing hasn't failed in a single print. And so what that means is when friends and family come and ask me, which printer should I buy? Is it one you have to assemble yourself and add a bunch of stuff to, like a Raspberry Pi? And, it looks cool. It looks like a tinker machine, whereas this is like a kitchen appliance. I think Adam Savage said this in one of his latest videos. And I mean that in, genuinely in the best kind of way. It's like, you don't think about your dishwasher. You don't think about, things in your kitchen that are appliances. And I don't think about this. I just press the button in the slicer and I come back 3 or 4 hours later and the thing that I put in has come out of the other end. It really is a remarkable machine, and it's reignited a love for me of 3D printing that over the last couple of years has dwindled just simply because I don't feel like with the Prusa I'm able to do an awful lot of exotic stuff. I tried ABS for the first time with this machine this week, apart from the stink, which I put this machine in my garage to deal with the fact that I'm running it so much more rather than just in the corner of my this is my bonus room, by the way. So one half of the room is a lounge where my family watch TV, and then the other half is, I've got my drums over there, and then, my desk area behind me where I make stuff and record podcasts and these videos, of course. This machine was noisy in a lounge setting, but quiet enough you could just turn the TV up a couple clicks and you'd be fine. This machine is loud. I wouldn't say it's deafening, but it's several steps louder than the Prusa. Now, they did just release this week, actually, a brand new firmware which reduced the decibel levels of the motors running by a significant margin. But there are still some fans in here, and just, the simple fact that this machine is running so much faster than this one, it's just noisier. And so I've elected to put the Bambu X1 Carbon and the P1S that I've purchased down in the garage underneath us. And I'm currently in the process of rebuilding workbenches and all that kind of stuff. But I find myself thinking, 3D printing is amazing again. It's fun. I don't have to worry about some of the stuff I do with the Prusa because it's an open frame printer. Drafts. I very rarely filled the bed up in this thing. I very rarely went up to the extremes of the bed. Not because there was anything wrong with the print, being the print bed not being level or the pinder sensor. Just simply because I experienced more failures when I filled the entire bed up because it's an open printer. This one having an enclosure means I can just fill the entire bed up. And I haven't, like I say, I haven't had a single first layer failure. And I've been printing a ton, and I do mean a ton, of those Gridfinity boxes. So, just in terms of usability and being fun to use, this machine, I'm sorry, Prusa, this machine is just next level. In fact, everything about the Bambu X1 Carbon is just better than the Prusa Mark III. Now, let's talk a little bit about the Mark IV. Prusa missed the boat. This machine has something called input shaping. It has an accelerometer built into it, so when the extruder's moving backwards and forwards, it can kind of, like you do in a car when you lean into a corner. Well, the firmware in here anticipates that the print head is going to have some mass to it and calibrates itself based on the amount of movement that's going to do to the rest of the printer. And so input shaping means you can run these things a lot faster than these things because they have more sensors in them. Now, this is based, I believe, off some work as part of what's called a Clipper firmware, which you might see on some Sovol printers and a bunch of other printers in the market. And Prusa have released input shaping for the Mark IV as well as the Prusa Mini and the XL. But the trouble is, those printers don't have accelerometers built in, so they're just based on a factory calibrated resonance frequency that, the Prusa think the printer probably has. But I've seen some crazy videos of this printer. Maker's Muse is a great example. Just on the wobbliest table you can possibly imagine. And it doesn't affect the print quality whatsoever. It's absolutely insane. And things like that just lead me to think that Prusa's kind of behind the times. The Bambu is a venture capital backed company based out of China. The investment is clear. They have put huge amounts of money into social media and YouTube influencers reviewing these things. It's hard to find a video where someone is talking about one of these machines where they haven't been sent it for free. Well, I'm glad to tell you, I am not a shill. I have paid full retail price for both of these printers and the other one in the garage. So I think you can take my opinion as being pretty unbiased, but of course I leave that up to your judgment to decide whether you trust me or not. But I'm going to come out and say it. I think Bambu Labs have absolutely nailed the next generation of 3D printing. The speed is amazing. The fact you can print with multiple colours out of the box is so much fun. I mean, even little things, right? Like where I'm printing tools with multicoloured text on it and stuff like that. You know, I printed my 3-year-old a little articulating multicoloured llama and a bumblebee and, you know, just silly stuff. When you're doing those multi-material prints, it is worth noting that it does do what's called filament poops. So one of the downsides to their design is this multi-material system up here, the AMS. It sends filament through a tube at the back of the printer all the way through to the extruder, which can be, you know, my fish was this big amount of filament all the way from the AMS all the way through into the extruder, which means it has to do quite a lot of filament purging. So you end up with these little poops every time it changes colour. So they can actually add up to be quite significant over a multi-hour print. For a model that weighs 20 or 30 grams, you could easily have double that just purging. So, you know, it's not a perfect system, but in terms of reliability of the filament changes and things like that, it has worked absolutely flawlessly for me. I also tried TPU, not through the AMS. You disconnect a tube at the back here and feed it in through a little spool holder on the side of the printer, which leads me to say there isn't an awful lot I don't like about this printer. You might be picking it up throughout this review, that the X1 Carbon really is an absolutely fantastic 3D printer. So what's my conclusion here today? It's not that the Prusas, and particularly the new ones, it's not that they're bad printers. This machine has printed for thousands of hours for me, and it's been very, very reliable overall. But this one's just better in almost every single way. And when you take the price into consideration, it's priced incredibly aggressively. Once you take into the account that, you know, I'm going to have to add an enclosure and all the technology and a webcam and all that kind of stuff to get the feature parity, they're about the same price. And the unfortunate reality is that Prusa's latest products, you know, they've taken their eye off the ball somewhere. They've been focused either on the XL, or they haven't been able to scale their manufacturing processes, or they're just dealing with the COVID hangover of supply chain shortages and all that kind of stuff. And for whatever reason, Bambu were not affected by those things. And so if you're in the market for a sort of $1,000, $1,500-ish 3D printer in late 2023, it's really difficult to do better than the Bambu Labs ecosystem right now. For the $1,500 end of the market, you've got the Bambu X1 Carbon that can do every exotic material you could ever possibly dream of with FDM printing. And then if your price point is under $1,000, you've got the P1S, which takes a few of those higher end things and takes some sensors out and that kind of stuff. And it does everything that the Bambu Lab Carbon does, except for some of the more exotic stuff. And I think what I want to see over the next year or two is Prusa just playing catch up. I don't want Prusa to go away as a company, but I will be selling this printer pretty much as soon as I'm done with this review. It's been sat on the bench for the last couple of weeks, waiting for me to get to that magic 500-hour number with this printer, just so that I could review it with some actual usage under my belt. And the reality is, I don't see a future for this printer in my fleet. So I hope you found today's video interesting and informative. I think I can probably sum it up like this. Prusa, please do better. Bambu Labs, thank you for doing an awesome job and innovating and pushing the 3D printing space forward. Until next time, I've been Alex from KTZ Systems.